Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. This month, FreeWilliam has chosen to make me design a floof-themed Warframe. FreeWilliam says, Parley, a simple one. There are no floof-themed Warframes in Warframe. I think that's true. Is that arguable in any way? And I don't think it is. You were in charge of rectifying this oversight. Show us your floof frame. Okay, a simple request that requires many small steps to complete. First of all, floof warframe. Now you've leaving this up. You've leaving this up for interpretation, did ye? So we're going to interpret. But I think that one way that we can interpret effectively is to think about well, what's cute about the word floof or the idea of a floof, and what would be design space that other warframes are not currently filling. You know, what interpretation of the word floof would make for a warframe that is like meaningfully different from other frames. And the first thing I thought of was I have a little friend with me here. This is a Cerberus plushie that I was given as a graduation gift because for my graduation project from college, from university, as the case may be, I had to write a novella, short novel, as my snooty English department defined it. And I wrote one that prominently featured a character that was basically like each of the three heads of Cerberus. So one of them was sleeping for most of it. That was kind of one of the ongoing mysteries. The other two had their own personalities. And they were sort of a major character in the dream sequences of the story. So my novella's primary character would dream every night, and they had this sort of ongoing series of dreams, like a story was being told in their head every night in installments. And this Cerberus friend was their sort of companion in that dream, almost as if they were a consistent character moment to moment. And so I got that plushie, and the thing about this plushie is that it it shows you a certain type of floof. It's pretty abstract in a way, right? It's not really a creature as per se. It's got, its little heads, and it's got its little fluff, and it's like fun to, hold, and I don't know, like I just kind of like bop it around like a ball, I guess. But it doesn't really look like a creature as per se. Personally, I think that the idea of a floof has something in common with like chibi aesthetic, I guess. Not entirely real to life, like to put it mildly. And these guys make me think, what if these were like drones or swarmers? This is that type of frame, right? That's what I think would be the most fun to do. There are a couple things in Warframe that are already a little bit like this. Tesla Nervos and Caliban can summon multiple sentients. That's not that close to this. There aren't a lot of frames that summon like a horde of things. Now, how can we code this? And we don't really need to worry about that because it won't be added into the game. But I would like to make a quick note that making there be like 50 individual bots that each have like 1 HP, and they move in a swarm, and you can sculpt the swarm into different shapes, and it's a swarm of little plushies that nip you in the ankles. Like, that sounds really cool. From a programming, like a computer processing perspective, to optimize that so people's computers can run it, that's like an unmitigated nightmare. So we're not, like, we couldn't do that, but we can because this is not real, right? Anyway, just a quick throwing a bone to the developers, shall we? Okay, let's get down to designing their kit. So 4 abilities and a passive. Now we could do some weird altercation, but unless it comes up, I probably won't. And there is kind of a template for Warframes, so we'll do that. We'll use that. We're gonna make a first ability that is 25 energy, a second ability that's 50, a third ability that's 75, a fourth ability that's 100, and the first ability is gonna try to be something that you can kind of weave in and out of combat, something that keeps you active as a player of the frame. Having it be a one-handed action in Warframe, that means you can be shooting a weapon while doing this ability without interrupting your attacking. Is really good. It helps you weave it in. A couple simple examples are Shock and Shuriken on Volt and Ash, respectively. These abilities don't do much, but they're good however good they are, whatever limited power they have. It's because you don't really need to pay any time to use them. You just need the energy. So that's cool. And then the fourth ability, the ultimate, or the ability that costs 100 energy, I think it's elegant if that is something you don't want to do constantly. Many Warframes aren't like this in practice, or aren't even designed like this, but I think it's a useful design template that could breed creativity. So I'll violate those rules if we get to the point where it's just a hassle and there's something I want to do, but I do think it's a good place to start. I'm rather confident that Digital Extremes does at least start with a similar process themselves, most of the time. Or at least they once did. Let's say it that way. And the passive, we'll figure that out, make it a meaningful passive. I probably won't do augments, but that would be fun. I think it's really good to do augments later. That's a really good way to make a Warframe feel meaningful before you put the augments in my opinion, rather than what happens is they often use them to band-aid abilities. There are a lot of augments that are not like that. People remember the ones that are like that, but there are indeed a lot that are kind of shoring up an ability's weaknesses. And I get it, but we would rather fix that by just patching that into the ability. Anyway, floof frame. Are we going to say that they're all individual targetable little guys? Like, and you summon like 50 of them or something? So here's an initial thought. You know how Vauban can hold Tesla Nervos and juggle them and get up to 4? And Hydroid has that mechanic where you can hold down the button to get like a bigger, his first and fourth ability. So what if we have kind of an extreme version of that, where the first ability, you tap to fire out a little guy for like 1 energy or something. But the real version is you hold it, you pay 25 energy, maybe it charges 1 more energy every, 10th of a second you hold it or something. And you can make a big cloud of floofs and chuck them out there. And that's how you kind of get it started. However, throwing them one at a time by tapping also causes effects if one of them is attached to an enemy, kind of borrowing a little bit from Tesla Nervos. Except I don't think these will do much on their own. They'll probably do something like, oh, that's fun. What if when a floof is on an enemy, it goes, hump, it's attached to the enemy's body somewhere? What if while it's on the enemy, if you shoot that spot, it's kind of like a weak spot, like a sonar spot or their head. You're kind of creating another weak spot. That's their basic function. So if they're all over an enemy, that's really effective, of course. You can shoot them pretty much everywhere. I think it would also be cool if they had some kind of volatility. So if there's a lot of them in one place and you shoot that place, maybe if you hit them with an explosive weapon or something, or a certain element, or not sure. We won't get too hung up on every exact detail, like damage numbers. It's just not efficient. It'd be better to get the broad strokes. And you could always tweak those things later. Then they explode and you get a bunch of damage. So if there are, maybe 10 or more in one area, and then you fire an explosive weapon or against some element or something, then they explode. I think having it be some element is a good idea. And I think that the element should be radiation. I think that there's a dearth of radiation-based frames, and a lot of them are not very popular. I wonder who I could be talking about there. Not because they're necessarily bad, but I think it'd be cool to add that design space to radiation. Or maybe it should be magnetic. That also feels in need of design space. And magnetic, it would be good because at the moment, a lot of players are not building magnetic, and very few weapons have innate magnetic. So maybe, I don't know, maybe. So maybe radiation magnetic based. We'll put a pin in that and see if it comes up again later. First ability, I'm going to say you throw out the floofs. So again, you've got a really, really cheap, it might just have to be 25 energy. You can throw out a single floof, and it's not very energy efficient for generating them, but it serves the purpose of getting one on an opponent. That's the Cerberus butt. And then, not sponsored, by the way. I don't know what brand this guy is. And that serves the purpose of putting one on an enemy, which will interact with your other abilities. And if you shoot the floof area, they maybe make a cute little ee and explode and do the big damage. You get a damage bonus of some kind, a multiplier. Another type of box we could check is something I talk about a lot when we do buildcraft shows for Warframe, which is the idea that most frames have a damage boosting ability, a survivability focused ability, and some random crowd control they can throw out. And some frames upend this trend by having kind of a stronger showing in one category at the expense of others. So at baseline, we'll keep that in mind as we go through making abilities, what things have been added. I feel like this is kind of a damage multiplier ability, if a janky one. And we also maybe have a crowd control thing. Maybe if a bunch of them get on an opponent, they slow them down. Like there's something like if 5 or 10 of them are on an enemy or near an enemy or something, they get progressively slower. What I'm imagining, I hope it's clear, is kind of like a tide of floofs roiling through the environment. I have no idea how you would code this. Again, we're just gonna hand wave that part. And probably they just sort of swarm near your aiming reticle, or the last place you shot, and then they have a bit of a mind of their own, besides. Again, that part would also be very difficult to program. Let's have a shout out for the developers. I think maybe they shouldn't explode if they're in a cluster, because that would be a really good second or third ability, I think. Or maybe a fourth ability where they all explode, but that would probably do a preposterous amount of damage. If there's so many of them, if the fantasy is like a tide of floofs, rapidly approaching, bouncing off the walls, getting at enemies, maybe it's not a good idea to have them all explode as a fourth ability. So second or third, okay. Yeah, why make the ability so overloaded? So we'll have that be the second or third one. Which one? The third ability. This feels like a big bombastic ability. And something I like in frame design is when a Warframe has some abilities that work in conjunction with others and some that do not. Personally, I think that's a good design for a lot of reasons. One of them is that the helmet system exists. You can add your own ability to a frame. Another reason is that it encourages players to simply use abilities and not always feel like they have to set everything up. Another way we can do that is to make sure that this third ability that explodes your floofs does something besides that, basically. I think it maybe could be a defensive ability too. How about this Warframe likes to be near things. Doesn't have to be enemies or allies, but just like creatures, targets. So this ability gives you some kind of defensive buff, and it's for every nearby entity. So you could be near your little swarm, then you'll get like the max bonus easily. Or you could just be near, 5 enemies, maxes it out. And when you use this ability, you send out a pulse, kind of a little, what's the flavor of this ability? This frame in general. This ability should help come up with that. Because what the heck are you doing when you do this? I'm imagining a kind of whoosh in, but what is it? Like spiritual energy? Are we embracing some kind of childlike wonder with, what do these look like? I am imagining little roly-poly guys with little mouths. Maybe Warframe doesn't really have a lot of that flavor, though. Maybe the Vent Kids offer something. Is this a Warframe that could embrace that a little bit? A little bit like Yoreli's tone as a character design. Okay, all right, that's not so far outside Warframe. That could be fine. And I mean, you didn't say I couldn't do it outside Warframe's tone, but I want to. Okay, yeah, so this is I'm imagining a kind of diminutive sized Warframe. Maybe like Neja's model size. We don't have a lot of frames that are that slightly shorter model size. This is a kind of more diminutive sized frame, more childlike, playful frame, like our dear third Lotus Prince. And we're gonna fire off a bunch of floofs. I'm not really sure, again, what the flavor of this is, though. It's like, is it emotions, but then it will work on robotics, and that's kind of a flavor fail. I don't know what this ability is, but anyway, in a radius, you do a thing. What defense do we want to give this frame? We're going to have to think about that later, because I'm not really sure what stat line this frame is going to have, but some defense. And then if you have your floof cloud in range, then the ones nearest to your reticle, or all of them on enemies, how about that, explode to do damage. Now this is nice too, because they'll do damage in an area, and so if enemies are grouped together, you kind of get a damage multiplier. This ability can therefore do rather modest damage, and it will still be meaningful against higher level enemies, especially if the frame does radiation based damage. In fact, how about radiation for this ability? And oh, I was saying magnetic before for the explosions, but maybe radiation and magnetic, or there's some corrosive in here too. The idea that these are kind of like anti-defensive bombs. So you have radiation and corrosive, the big elements against armor, and then corrosive status effects. and also magnetic against shields. And this is kind of like an anti-tech frame, which kind of fits the vent kids too, robbing from the corpus and doing their little hit and run tactics to steal supplies to make K drives. That feels kind of thematic. Okay, cool. All right, so radiation there. How about when one is on an enemy, they get a magnetic status effect. That just happens. So the first ability, if you throw one at someone, and by the way, I think this is like you throw it really fast. We're talking this Warframe has like an arm-mounted little cannon, and they go boom, and it shoots out like a really, really fast, maybe even hit scan. There's no travel time, little floof. Like it extremely quickly applies one. I like the idea that you could be shooting and go boom, and then like see where it hit an enemy and move your, assault rifle or whatever to hit that target like very, very quickly in the flow of combat. That could be a really fun gameplay loop. And the idea of having all these little friends that are ee and then exploding is a fun idea to me. It also reminds me a little bit of peculiar mods. You know peculiar mods, there's the one where you shoot enemies and they get flowers on their head. You shoot enemies and their head gets bigger. Maybe this frame could come with the release of a few more peculiar mods and the ability to not need to use your Exilus slot for peculiar mods, because that's always been a shame in my opinion. Or maybe this frame even gets a bonus from using a peculiar mod. Maybe they... Yeah, maybe that could be their passive. Is that a weird passive? I don't know. Anyway, peculiar mods count as a status effect? That's just overpowered. Well, no, but it's unnecessary. Anyway, the other thing about having a magnetic status effect immediately when you throw a floof is that this would be a very low cost ability that would enable the damage per status effect, condition overload like effects, which has some buildcraft implications. Those effects are good anyway, but there are good weapons that don't output a great variety of statuses, and this frame would be able to so easily add a very uncommon status type that for people that like that in their builds, this would hopefully be interesting without really being that overpowered, because it's ultimately just a minor base damage buff. Anyway, could also be really cool when combined with other frames abilities like sonar and stuff, but I guess you'd need to be in a party. Anyway, we also got to figure out which helmet ability. There's so many things, but we've got a few abilities and maybe a passive or aesthetic idea at least. This is a kind of scrappy Vent Kids inspired frame that fires little puffball explosive, malignant stuffed animals that are kind of focused on countering enemy defenses in some way. Cool. And our first ability, you can hold to throw a big mass of them, get a big cloud of them in the environment. Maybe 2 casts held gives you your full cloud of 50 or however many, I don't know. And again, the way I'm thinking of these is they each have 1 hit point. So they get hit by a bombard rocket, use a whole chunk. Maybe only like 5 or 10 of them can die at once that way. And a heavy gunner could mow down like quite a few of them, switching targets repeatedly. Enemies in Warframe are kind of bad at that. But anyway, they could try while you would still have quite a few. And because there are so many and they're going to be fast, you can have them attached to many enemies and still have a cloud of them kind of going. Cool. I also think that our third ability, which gives you some defenses based on nearby allies and enemies alike, and also explodes your floofs if they're in a cloud. I think it'd be cool if holding that ability drew your floof cloud to you. So in other words, the ones that are not attached to enemies, if you hold down your third ability, they just drift toward you for however long you hold it down. It's not really casting something, they just kind of a little closer. Something that people have talked about a lot in Warframe is how many minion-based builds or frames where the buildcraft fantasy is to kind of make a cloud of minions that fight with you. There isn't any good way, there's almost no way at all in Warframe to control your ally movement. And I think this is a good example of something where there's way too many of them anyway, so having a vague control, some vague influence over their position. They move toward your reticle-ish, you can kind of shoot them directly at enemies, and you can just make them kind of come closer. These gentle suggestions could work well for this frame. And while I was talking about that, I came up with an idea for how this frame will get their defenses. You remember before how I was saying that this frame could be themed after like these little fluffs are like vent kit explosives that counter enemy defenses. Well, what if when this Warframe gets defenses based on nearby allies and enemies, the defenses they get are based on the nearby allies or enemies, if that makes sense. So if they're a Grineer, like armored Grineer, you get more armor. If they're your floofs, then you get something else. And if they're, Corpus or allied Tenno, you get a third thing. Grineer, you get armor. Your floofs or infested, you get health. And Corpus or allied Tenno, you get shields. Now, one thing about that I care about, mostly from a buildcraft perspective, is that seems cool and thematic, but I want to feel like this Warframe's survivability doesn't drastically vary depending on what mission type they're in. So, for example, if you were in a Grineer focus mission, you would expect to be getting armor and health from your floofs and Grineer, and maybe some shields from an allied Tenno. And that seems really good. You'll probably be very tanky. But then when you're in a Corpus mission, you're going to expect to get just a bunch of shields. So anything that would have influenced your armor or health won't work. You won't have that damage reduction. Maybe you were healing yourself or whatever, and then you won't have the health pool for that to be that meaningful. That seems kind of eh. So maybe you get some kind of damage reduction on top of that. Maybe another way to compensate for this would be if you get some minor shield regeneration when you do this to Corpus or allied Tenno. And then doing it to allied Tenno and getting mild shield regeneration, you'll always have like an allied Tenno. And then finally, this ability will be programmed to favor a variety. So in other words, if within range there is a Grineer, a floof, and an allied Tenno, but there's way more Grineer and way more floofs, the ability will prefer to give you one stack of the Tenno buff and one stack of the Grineer and the floof buff before giving you more of whatever there's more of. So you get a variety before you get a bunch of one thing. So with big radius, you will reliably get the Tenno buff, and then you'll consistently have like some mild shield regeneration on top of having like more shield capacity as a buffer or more armor and health. So you'll have to adapt, I guess. Maybe we could give this frame some kind of universal lifesteal ability. But I feel like this is fine overall. You just want to tune it in such a way. You understand where I'm going with this? I don't want the player to be massively differently tanky depending on the enemies they're fighting. That just seems kind of bad. But I do like the idea that the frame plays differently against different factions to mimic having different tactics. This could be really fun in the frame's lore or quest. Different tactics against different factions taught to them by the vent kids or something like that. That could be fun. We got to come up with a name for this frame. Anyway, second and fourth ability, and then nail down the passive, and that's the time we have. What could they be? What do we do? Well, the fourth ability, again, I want to do something different for some of these too. The fourth ability, I'm kind of interested in a big one. Something about floofs that isn't encapsulated by the swarmer idea and the cute idea is just hugging a big old plush, having a gigantic fluff that you can, that's literally your bed or whatever. Having a huge one seems kind of appealing to me. I always liked Atlas's augment that gives you this big guy. Your rumblers unite into a huge single rumbler. I've just always felt like that was kind of worse than having two. Not in every way, but in a lot of ways. So maybe we could create an ability a little bit like that. How? I want it to eat enemies, I guess. Another thing it could do is suck in enemies. Like a kind of a combination of Atlas's big rumbler and Vauban's vortex. And it kind of sucks in enemies and then kind of pops in some way. I don't know. But what does it do? It sucks into enemies in a radius and also your floofs. And then it does damage for every floof you suck in and spreads them to as many enemies as possible, maybe. But then you kind of want to spam it. Or does it have a cooldown because it consumes some floofs? It only sucks in floofs that are not on an enemy, so it's a way to get them on enemies, but only if you haven't done that yet. Something like that, maybe. And this could also stack a lot of corrosive. Maybe it kind of chews them. For some reason, the fantasy to me is that this is like an event-style ability. What I mean by that is that it's not very static. It feels kind of like there's a sequence of events that happen. It's got character. Your big plushie, and then hum hum hum. Puh. You know, there's these kind of 3 steps to the ability, which I feel like, I don't know, just thematically fits the fantasy of having a fluff as your ally. And I like the idea of the chewing as a way to get multiple stacks of corrosive on enemies. Or maybe when it spits out the floofs, those applied floofs also give a stack of corrosive to enemies, as well as magnetic when they attach. Does that make sense? So the ability does 3 things. If there are enough floofs nearby that are not attached to enemies, let's say 25, so half, you could always hold cast your first ability to get that cloud of unattached floofs at your feet. So spamming this ability would be inefficient because you need to set it up that way. You could just as easily simply throw them at a few enemies if there wasn't a lot of targets. And we'd balance it so that that would be effective. That I don't know exactly how. You might need to tweak the animation speed. Anyway, it groups enemies in an area, but you need those floofs to do it. So it's not as reliable a grouping ability to spam. But then it'll chew those enemies, heavily reduce their armor, so you can use this on heavier targets as well if you find them. And then it spits out all the floofs. They all magnetize and just stick to all the enemies in the environment, probably also through walls. It'd be really cool if you could program the floofs to go around terrain and find enemies in the environment. That'd be really fun, a lot of personality to little floof balls. Or maybe they kind of ping pong ricochet off the environment to find enemies. This would be a nightmare to program, but anyway. Yeah, then they give enemies that get stuck with the floof this way also a corrosive status effect as well as magnetic. So they have their shields and armor reduced. Not by a ton, but certainly by a little. The first corrosive status effect does do a lot. Okay, cool. So yeah, we do have an ability that feels kind of separate, and it'll still, let's see. Does it do anything if you don't have the floofs around? It's okay if it doesn't, I guess. Well, maybe we could say something like, if there are enough enemies around, it works, but then you can use your floofs to enable it. If there's more than 5 enemies in the radius, or like 8 enemies in the radius or something, you could tweak that a little bit. A little bit like Titania's augment, Spellbound Harvest, that only works if there are 4 or more enemies hit. Okay, a second ability. And I want something much more vanilla. What do we not have here? What's a floof-related ability that would be nice? Maybe a gun-focused buff or an explosion-focused buff. It would be really overpowered if it was, I just thought, a buff to increase explosive weapon radius. But that's ridiculously overpowered. Also, this is probably going to be the Frame's Helminth ability, so that's just not, I don't know. That doesn't seem that good for the game. It'll just make explosive weapons even more the default. That seems kind of, I don't know. Man, the second ability, what do we do? What do other frames have as a thematic thing? So Nidus is an example of a frame that has kind of this one resource, not floofs, but mutation stacks. Gross, but you know, it's the same kind of thing that sort of play into all of their abilities. But they do have Larva, which feels a little separate from that. They've got the Stomp to get the stacks that way. Parasitic Link. Yeah, maybe something friendly to affect allies and yourself in some way. But like what though? A damage buff, an elemental damage type buff, maybe? For magnetic damage? Maybe? I don't know. Maybe people wouldn't like that. We already have the magnetic status effect. I don't want to do a radiation damage buff because Oberon's augment for his first ability, Smite, is already that. So that doesn't appeal to me. It could still give like some radiation damage, I guess, but I want to do something a little different. Man, I don't know. All right, so we've got the player. Another way to do it is to think about where the player has a gap in their gameplay experience. So they've got their little arm launcher to shoot floofs at enemies while they're shooting them. They've got their cloud of floofs roiling around with them. They got their defensive ability to take defenses inspired by the people around them, and also to detonate a cloud of their floofs, should we separate that out. Yeah, but then our defensive ability becomes the Helminth ability, and I feel like it's too similar, but I guess it isn't. I don't know. Yeah, I guess the straightforward thing to do would be to make one of the abilities detonate the floofs and the other ability be the defensive thing. You could separate those. But I don't know. I guess I'll live with that for now and focus on the passive a bit. Yeah, I don't know. I like the peculiar thing. I think giving the player the ability to equip peculiar is probably not as a mod, just as like another effect that doesn't take up their Exilus slot on their frame, and adding some peculiars and making it so this frame gets a benefit from each different peculiar or something. So you can kind of pick what passive you want, but what are these effects? Maybe they make your floofs prefer certain types of enemies, but I don't love that because it kind of isn't a passive. It's just sort of a way to program your frame. I found that players don't like that type of passive, where it's just like setting an element for another ability, right? I think that's a cool idea. Your floofs prefer a certain type of behavior based on the peculiar, or they're attracted to enemies with a peculiar on them, but you could just do that. It doesn't have to be the passive. What about the passive? Well, this Warframe doesn't have a very straightforward damage buff. Now, they don't have an ability that is just like a straightforward you get more damage. So we could add something like that. What about I like the idea of it being base damage because we have all these elemental status effects. Adding another elemental damage type seems excessive. And crit has been done a lot lately. I don't think we need to add crit there. Could add status chance, base damage and status chance. Flat status chance up to 50% for every nearby floof. And also base damage and status chance up to 50%, flat base damage and status chance, up to 50% for every nearby floof. How about that? Sure, that's fun. You're encouraged to stay near them. Maybe it can also include being near anything, like it's not just your floofs. So if you don't have them out, but you're near like 10 enemies, you do still get like a modest, the base damage is pretty small, but that status chance, 10% flat status on some weapons, that might be kind of broken. On beam weapons, that's kind of insane. Yeah. Anyway, you could tweak that. It doesn't have to be a flat amount. We could do 100%, 2% per enemy you're near, up to per entity you're near, up to 50%, or up to 100%, and it's not a flat amount. That's fine. And that would be a way to help balance it a bit. Still pretty good on beam weapons, but it's fine. The flat output on beam weapons thing would just be insanely broken. You would be able to stack heat to ungodly levels extremely easily. That would make this frame not really about any of these mechanics. You would just use a heat-based beam weapon and annihilate the universe, which some of them already do. We don't need to make all of them do that, I don't think. It would still be really good with them. I don't know. Maybe that's still too strong. But I think that's fun. The theme of having a few more benefits, a passive one and an active one, for being near just a bunch of people, the most people. I also think we want to add that fourth ability. It sucks enemies in, chews them, reduces their armor, spits back out the floofs. They attach to enemies. You get a bonus corrosive status effect. That ability's suction radius should be larger than all of the other abilities that pull enemies together. I think right now that benchmark is at like 12 meters, I want to say. So this one should be a little larger, 15 meters at base, something like that. Because it's slower to activate than the other ones. And I want to provide a little incentive for players that want to use that ability, but would feel like, but is it better to just group enemies more frequently? Well, this one does have the advantage of affecting a larger area and maybe working through walls. Maybe it'll suck enemies boing, boing, boing through a corridor. You don't have direct line of sight on them. And then they get sucked into the floof's mouth. That just sounds kind of fun. I don't know. Yeah, all right, I'm sticking to that. What's the frame's name? We have Urelli. Can I take any inspiration there? I don't know why this comes to my mind, but how about Brago? I don't know why. For some reason that it feels diminutive. We've got this small stature frame. I don't particularly know or care what representative gender or sex this frame is gonna have. I like Brago. I don't know. That feels. Look at this guy. Is this guy not Brago? I don't know. I mean, forget about the Cerberus thing, obviously. But I don't know. I'm gonna go with that. Brago, the floof frame. What do you think, FreeWilliam? How'd we do? I am pretty excited about this one. A lot of the time when I make up a design for a frame, I feel like they don't, like, I think this is cool, but I wouldn't be that happy if this was in Warframe because we just don't need it. But I actually like this one. Like, I would enjoy I created a gameplay flow I would like surprise. But anyway, I thought it came out cool. What'd you think? Thank you very much for the support. Welcome back to Parley. Looking forward to the next one.